The Maya calendar is formulated in the pulses of nature, in the earth, the sky, the star, the movements, Venus, the moon, the sun, the position of the sun. It's astronomically based on the pulses of nature, and we are nature. Then the day, any given day of the Mayan calendar is going to be understood as a formula of a composition of those principles. What is feminine, what is masculine, beyond gender. This is just a way of classification. Does not has nothing to do with actual, let's say, sexual reproduction. It's a way of a classification of principles, complementary principles, as the day is masculine and the night is feminine, as resting is feminine and activity is masculine. But it's just a classification. This is just a way to talk. It's a scientific way of classification of phenomena. Yep. Then every Mayan day will already give us a clue of a formulation of a day, which elements compose a day. When we study human behavior according to the Mayan calendar, we follow the same procedures. We have a composition of elements that give us, in a sense, a direction in consciousness.
Welcome back to Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here as your host. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for visiting us, giving us your auditory companionship. If you're new to the podcast, thank you as well. New or returning, I ask you the same. Please share with your family and friends and rate us and subscribe. So actually 3 things. So rate us, subscribe, share with your family and friends. We are a registered charity as well, and we all give our time. We donate our time to this, to the exploration of the what ifs and why nots with people, interesting people all around the world. And so if you are inclined to donate and to help the cause, by all means, just go to our website, behindgreatness.org, and you can see where you can donate. All right. So today we have a guest joining us from Mexico, or he spends half his time in Mexico and half in Guatemala. Is that correct? Half and half?
Yeah, correct.
And we'll learn why in just a moment. His name is Apab'yan Tew. He is an Artich. Did I pronounce that okay? I didn't.
Perfectly. Artich is teacher. Artich is a spiritual guide.
So you're both?
Yeah, I'm both.
Okay. So he is a spiritual guide of a Quiche Maya lineage of the highlands of Guatemala. In addition to being an expert reader of the Mayan calendar, daykeeper, bone healer, herbalist, he's also the only man that has been trained as a midwife in the highlands. During decades of practice, Apab'yan has developed an extended scheme of understanding the consciousness of the baby through the pregnancy time. An introduction of that has been shared in his first book, The Birth of a Universe, The Maya Science of Pregnancy. The Maya science and philosophy that studies procreation points towards a sacred and cultured femininity. In the acts of one's mother are the biological and cognitive connections that will structure the deployment of the different forms of conscience through which one will face the world and decant in perception and interpretation. I love decant. I love it. His efforts have been directed to present an ancient knowledge, not as a folkloric tale, but as a science that can explain us all as the result of inception or conception processes. A full science still to be shared. And you can visit him a little bit as well on his at his website, mayascience.com. Welcome to the show, Apab'yan.
Good morning. Hello to everybody listening to this conversation. I am very happy to share this knowledge that has been highly, let's say, not secretively, but highly let's say preserved only in the mountains. But now we have the, let's say, the permission, we have entered into the openness to begin to share what since ancient times has been the knowledge of the baby, receiving the baby. And also, and beyond the practice, what is character, what is personality, and how we, the Mayans, we connect our present life behavior to the moment of pregnancy.
So it's excellent. So I want to get into understanding personality as well, and your perspective. When you say the highlands and the mountains and the highlands, you're referring to Guatemala. For the listener,
Yeah.
just to reconfirm that. And your family was from a town named Nawal Ja. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Nawal Ja.
Nawal Ja.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's silly. That's silly in Spanish. Ja. So before we get started with, I guess, my first question, I just wanted to thank Dr. Thomas Verney, who is a past guest here on the podcast, psychiatrist, well-known author as well, and pioneer in perinatal and prenatal consciousness. And I think that's how we linked up, because you read his book and then he introduced us. Lovely man. So I'm glad he put us together. Before this conversation started to record, we talked about drums. And you spent a few minutes talking to me about drums, and it looks like you were getting to a specific point that I thought you would get to, and you did. It was wonderful. Do you remember what you said about drums and the mother?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you that during the process of my teachings, or the way I was learning about woman's body, the woman's manifestations of in the skin, in the eyes, in the hair, how we read changes in the woman's biology, it also includes pulsating the blood. It also includes learning and reading that pulse to track healthiness, emotions, even dreams connected, how the woman express a dream. And we Mayans, we are familiarized with the pulse of the blood, with hearing the sound of the blood more than using an stethoscope or any other device in technological ways. We follow the pulse in the hands, in the neck, in the feet sometimes, but we follow the pulse. And by that, we can follow the change of thoughts in a person, the change of emotions in a person. And I began to see in a subtle way how the way we talk to the mother, how the mother talk to us, how the baby moves during a consultation affects that pulse. And then little by little, by experience, I began to see how using specific ways of speaking will be making a more softer pulse and a more, I will say, comfortable heart beating in the mother that is comfortable for the baby. Now I will make a pause. Later on during delivery, I saw also the differences of how a baby was delivered comfortably or in pain or in a long period of time of stress and variations, to later on also begin to play drums in a very soft way. And this was my adding to this tradition, as to say something, in the way to use drums, play in a very soft way to replicate the soft drumming, with soft drumming, to replicate this beating of the woman's heart when the baby is received. And the baby, in our tradition, the first things to be done is to be bathed. The baby is bathed in in a herbal potion, as to say something, and then after the cleaning, the baby can still be like nervous, like moving, like uncontrolled, and you can actually with a small drum you can replicate, and the baby can enter into the baby can calm down, the baby can stop all these uncontrolled movements, and the baby begin to listen very beautifully.
Okay.
Evidently, not all the deliveries are the same. Not in every case is necessary, but it's very beautiful to see the connection, or to discover the connection between the mother and the baby, and what is something that is a fact during the entire pregnancy, and is that the baby has access. One of the most relevant elements, let's say, in sound is precisely the beating of the heart of her own mother, and that continues, and that can be seen, that connection is done by the proximity the baby has with the mother, specifically in the Mayan culture, in which the baby is always carried during 9 months, close to close, skin to skin, breastfeeding, and the heart is precisely one of the most important. The beating, the sounds are one of the most important elements to take into account, and we can track variations, conditions, the state, let's say, emotional state of the baby and the mother through the blood, the heart beating of the mother.
Yeah, there's something there that you said about following the pulse. You can feel the change of thoughts by following the pulse.
Oh yeah.
I was so we'll get into that, I think. But I was secretly hoping that you would say that about the mother's heartbeat and drums, because we had an elder here on the podcast as well. His name is Kat Krieger. He's an elder from Toronto. He's Canadian. And he explained to us how the drum beat, specifically the indigenous, some of the indigenous chants that are done by single drum beats, are done that way to reminisce the connection the drummer has with the mother in the womb. So following the heartbeat of the mother.
And it's still the same. In Maya, we call it the kush, the heart. And the beating of a drum in a, let's say, in a group of musicians is the most important. We follow them always. You have to follow the playing of the drum. If the drum player goes faster, we go faster. If he changes the rhythm, we go slower, or we follow that rhythm. For the playings, let's say, I'm going to say the regular, the average, in a party, why not? Because in my town, the same musician is for every event. I, as a drum player, also, I have to participate in different ways. But for the baby, it's softer, it's slow, has to go to make one on one the pulse of the baby and the pulse of the mother's beating heart. And it is amazing to see how the connection is done. Yes, it is the same for us. It's a heart beating. Sometimes it's even said that it's the heart beating of the earth, the way the earth pulsates. That's also said in our culture.
Okay, perfect. Because I was going to segue into this question about the idea of God. And we were talking about your teachers, your mentors, and you said one teacher that you had used to say that the idea of God is initiated during pregnancy. And you followed up by explaining to me that when you started to discover as you were learning the Mayan ways of midwifery, that when you see the mother in a state of anxiousness or wishing or needing to be alone through the experience, that it develops a child with different kinds of attachments. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I remember. And by the way, I have to say that it's a very sophisticated way to understand conditions. Because for the purpose of explaining, when I was during, let's say, consultations with mother during a long time, we begin with my teacher, Nan from a woman from my town, my Quiche lineage of midwifery and also a spiritual guide. We began sometimes we began with people before she got pregnant. Sometimes we began like analyzing the body or doing messages or preparing the woman. But in most of the cases, we track and we follow the continuity of a pregnancy during the 9 months or during the months that the pregnancy takes. And I was able, for my curious mind and curious heart of always, I began to see differences between the conditions. Because, for example, one of the things that are very common is that the mother ends up being alone and the father trying to get a ticket to go to the USA or to go to try to taste fortune in a different place. Then we began to see, or we could see women who were left back in town, and to begin to see the differences precisely in the pulse, in the healthiness, in the wishes, in their way they portray not only, let's say, God, but the universe, the life as such, differentially from what was their experience with their mothers. Because in the previous generation, nobody will go to try to go to the USA or to try to go for a better economical situation to another place. The previous generation was very close in my town. Then this is the first generation that really faced this situation. But to continue this analysis, I will say that later on, living in the town, I could see how some of the babies develop more religious attachments. Even since they were kids, I could see how some of them already were showing an inclination for spirituality, an inclination for to go to church or to go to the temple in the case of evangelical, let's say, cults, or to go and accompany me, for example, in my spirituality ways to the mountains. And I began to wonder about that, how some of the kids already were showing that and were already, let's say, eager to enter into some sort of ceremony or a mass or following teachings.
And what
And then
difference?
I began.
Sorry to interrupt, Fabian. So I'm used to calling you Fabian because that's your Spanish name, your Mexican name. So Fabian or Apab'yan. What is it with them? What is you told me you found a difference between those children who for whom you oversaw their birth with children who had fathers present as well.
Yeah, well, it depends on the condition and the case. But what I was elaborating was that being in town and continuously seeing the same kids and they growing up, I could see the differences also when the father returns and when the father does not returns. And then there's something that I have always done. I always took notes. I always took lots of notes in the mountains. Well, that was one of my even my hobbies, because I had all the time. There was no internet. There was no TV. We were alone in the mountains. And I was making my notes. Then when I began to see those tendencies, I go back to my notes, what I wrote about those babies during pregnancy, and I began to see the connections. I began to see the connections that whenever the mother was more during pregnancy, specifically more over the 24 week of pregnancy, and when the mother was more in apprehension, more in nervousness, more when the mother was more on the wishing, desiring, more on which the mother was more vulnerable in a sense of the physical and the present social conditions of pregnancy, those kids or those women tend to shape the consciousness or produce a shape of consciousness in the baby in a way that those babies later on were more religious, were more spiritually attached, as if to make a bridge in connection between conditions, the vulnerability state and the wishing and the needings of a help later on will be developed or be manifest in human consciousness or human manifestation of behavior as a needing for an extra help, not the actual physical, but the believing that something else can come. And that, among some other factors, is one of the elements that makes me think that the shaping of the consciousness of the mother during pregnancy is key for to understand a person in a full development. And this is only the religious ways.
So let's talk a little bit then about the Mayan calendar. So I learned listening to you in another interview about 3 calendars. The Mayans had 3 calendars, if I'm please interrupt and correct if I'm off here. The first is a sacred calendar that lasts 260 days and rotates like we do ours with 365. The second is a secular calendar, which does last 365. And then the final calendar is the long count calendar, which lasts 144,000 days or a little less than 400 years.
The third one is not really used in the mountains anymore. It goes now, even for present time understanding of calendars, as an artifact of the past. We no longer use that as a way for tracking mostly anything. It's a beautiful creation or a beautiful discovery from our grandfathers, but it's not really used anymore. What we use as a third calendar is another calendar that is called Cholik. That is not known, not really well known. Is mostly. It's also called the woman's calendar, by the way. I'm going to make a resume. The 260 days is a Cholqir, is the sacred, the Venus count, we call it also. The other is the solar count, Masewalqir, that is 365 days, and the Chol'ik. The Chol'ik is what we call the woman's calendar and is always connected and related to the movements and the positions of the moon. This third calendar, actually in use, can be understood also for agricultural purposes and the ways of pruning, cultivating, harvesting. But in the area of pregnancy and delivery, it is used for the calculations of the baby's development of consciousness, learning ways. We strongly believe that it learns during pregnancy, and also for the pulses of health, growing, and development on the woman's body for preparation for the delivery. The Cholik, the count of the moon, specifically the new moon beginning, is the one that gives us clues, mathematical clues, and counting to be tracking the pregnancy. We always follow the Cholik.
So what does that mean, mathematical clues?
Yeah, we use the phases of the moon. We can count. We can begin to count, or we begin to count by one simple question. We ask to the mother, when is the moment in which the last sign of the moon, that's the way we call it, retal ik, to menstruation, when was the last moment that you discovered it was not coming? From then on, we count the number of days until a new moon. And when the new moon is calculated, it can be from 27, 28, 2 days, or the same day. We calculate 13 full moons to be tracking the development of the baby. And during those 13 phases, we are going to be having, if possible, one session per phase of the moon, to be tracking precisely the growing of the belly, for example, or the changes in the eyes, changes in the hair, changes in the skin, dark spots, or, for example, in extreme cases, anemia, whatever. But at least we are going to have a consultation in every full moon, and we are going to track the days according to those numbers.
And how does the calendar account for, because you mentioned this a few minutes ago, personality? How do you find the person? How do you pinpoint or identify the personality of the child?
Well, this is the most beautiful question. I have, differentially from this, is a complete shift of theme. For to track personality and character, first of all, we Mayans divided differentially character and personality. But for the main explanation, the core explanation, we use two factors, which is the mother as a creator, the mother as developer, the mother as the most important element, and what can it be an oscillating element, or an oscillating in understanding. That it means the presence of a counterpart. Usually, for us in the mountains, well, the father, the complementary father, but we don't know after an inception is successful, at least biologically, the father does not necessarily has to be present. Then we divide we call it the feminine principle and the masculine principle, or the feminine principle and the complementary principle, which can be another father. It could be in the absence of the biological father, it could be the family. In these new ways of relationships, it could be also a woman. And no matter what the identity of gender during creation, we call it femininity principle of creation. That is the body of a woman as a gender, let's say. The complementary can be different. But what we analyze is precisely how these factors are going to be in dynamics, and in certain degrees, creating precisely a shaping in the baby's consciousness. For example, if the father is not present during pregnancy, we will see that there are at least making big just examples like sometimes the mother can hold it, sometimes the mother is so strong it does not matter, but sometimes the mother, in other cases, the mother cannot go with that, and they began to produce, let's say, bleedings or problems or anemia or extreme nervousness. Sometimes they lose the baby by that.
Mm.
The most important part is how the baby is receiving both influences, or the influence of the mother and the shaping and the absence of the other, to determine to which degree the baby is absorbing precisely that phenomena. What we have and we had and we understand with the Maya calendar is how precisely the conditions of pregnancy and how these two factors interact to understand what the needs of a baby are. For example, in a couple, for example, that are already fighting during pregnancy, and both principles, the mothers and the complementary, are in conflict, it's more easy to see that a baby is going to be born with an already shaped consciousness based on the anger.
Sure.
The baby, to say something, is already angry. And we can see all the variations. By the way, every single variation of humor and character can be understood by the process in which these two principles are interactive in pregnancy. And it is always a fact. Obviously, we will say that the more the mother is strong, the more the mother is on her place, the best for the baby's consciousness. But the presence, the absence, the conditions of the other are going to be given one basic principle for us Mayans that says that the excess or the lackings during pregnancy later on are going to be the way in which we reject or the way we pursue the stuff in life. That is something that is always, it's even easy to, to study, by the way, to see how we do already have had that. The next question is, how do we get or how do we hold that if in the babies, let's say, there's not still some sort of a brain-based memory or experience? What we Mayans said is that it goes more onto the perception, in a bodily perception of comfortability and uncomfortability, pleasant, unpleasant, silence and noise. Is more a memory or a bodily memory, consciousness-based the way in which the baby collects this information, and therefore is not mediated by thoughts.
If memory is an indicator, how does knowing the date of a baby's birth help inform personality? Or am I misunderstanding this? Because we touched briefly upon birth date reading.
The day in the Mayan calendar, in a way that this is the first time that I'm going to say this openly to open audience, the Maya calendar is a formulated is formulated in the pulses of nature, in the earth, the sky, the star, the movements, Venus, the moon, the sun, the position of the sun. It's astronomically based on the pulses of nature, and we are nature. Then the day, any given day of the Mayan calendar, is going to be understood as a formula of a composition of those principles: what is feminine, what is masculine, beyond gender. This is just a way of classification. Does not has nothing to do with actual, let's say, sexual reproduction. Is a way of a classification of principles, complementary principles, as the day is masculine and the night is feminine, as resting is feminine and activity is masculine. But it's just a classification. This is just a way to talk. It's a scientific way of classification of phenomena. Yep. Then every Mayan day will already give us a clue of a formulation of a day, which elements compose a day. When we study human behavior according to the Mayan calendar, we follow the same procedures. We have a composition of elements that give us, in a sense, a direction in consciousness. The same day and the same factors we use to analyze weather, to analyze clouds, to analyze the position of the sun, same way help us or serve us to be more precise, to understand human behavior, human character. We are product of nature, and every day is going to give us that formulation. You belong to a formula, to, let's say, for say it in some way, you belong to some certain formula that is going to give me, for example, in your case, a strong mother. In my case, a lovely, strong mother, but with the absence of a father. And every day is going to give us those specifics. But for example, there are days that are going to give us the clue that the masculine part or the complementary part was toxic during pregnancy. Every day is going to give us the elements and the compositions of all principles. And that's the way we understand and we follow the rules of nature as such.
Let's go back a little bit to why, number one, why did you choose midwifery? Because to use your words, it's odd to see a male midwife. And then these were your words, and I thought it was pretty honest and open with you, of you, excuse me. And you said you don't openly offer midwifery. You've delivered 19 babies, but you now have students and even non-Mayan students. So my question is, why midwifery? And number two, why don't you openly offer it?
Well, there are two. Well, let me be. This question is very interesting for me because it's always a matter of me laughing a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when I arrived to the lands, I was looking for my father's family in Nawal Ja. And my approach to the Mayan calendar was also a way of healing the absence of my biological father during my development, my early development as a child. And I was interested in the Maya calendar as a fantastic way to understand the ancient cultures, architecture, astronomy, codexes, the stars and stuff. And I really wanted to know these specifics, maybe even like esoteric knowledge or something like that. And that was my approach. I wanted to know the secret formulas, maybe I would say the incantations, the fire, the procedures, the ceremonies, the incantation of spirituality as such. But then I entered into a place in my life in which I was crossing some sort of a limbo, which is very peculiar to say that I was no longer a regular and average human being just roaming the earth, and I wasn't still yet a fully developed spiritual guide ready to give consultations. We all apprentices cross that bridge in which you are in the middle. You can no longer return to your previous life, and something is pushing you to go deep to understand, specifically with me that I love knowledge. And I was really lost. I wasn't living in Mexico, but I wasn't fully a kitchen Mayan in the mountains. I was still in the middle of, oh, shall I return to my previous life? Shall I go? Shall I cross? Shall I go to the USA? Why not? Whatever, right? I was highly confused when my teacher, Maria Catalina, so found me one day. And she was the one that she says, I know you. I have been looking at you in the town, going here and there, and I know that you love spirituality. And she made me the proposal to live in her house by this change of work, which in the Mayan highlands, the man's work is going to the woods, cutting the wood, going for to collect herbs, and doing the masculine work of working the crop fields, which she couldn't do completely because she was old already. She lost a couple of kids. The history is that their kids, well, a couple of men tried to go to the USA and they died in the intent. It was never resolved. She suffered because of that, blah, blah, blah. She was alone. And then I could be a complementary element in her life. And by the way, for me, it was such a good offer because I could be continue learning. I will be continue following the Mayan calendar and learning with a person from the mountains. I had no scholarship or anything. It was everything done by let's say by adventure, but not a real adventure as such. And I went to live with her. For my surprise, she was a midwife. And my first attempt was to escape from the house.
To escape.
I didn't really. I wasn't. Yeah, to escape because it was not something that I would that I. It was something that I wouldn't even choose. I never. The only thing that I got really as a background, even in clinical ways, was Dr. Bernie's book that I read when I was younger, and that I read it for general culture purposes, not by direct interest. I learned it because I love to read, and I read that book, and I was like, "Whoa, the baby's conscious," and that's it. But when I began to live with my teacher in her house, and her house was in the top of a mountain, then it was always a 2 hours effort to go to the mountain and to go down to the center of town, for example. And well, it was not my inclination to see blood, to see this, to see woman screaming, or to be listening to people crying, or telling their misfortune, or the opposite, right? The good fortune, blah blah blah. It was not really my inclination, but
Then you got used to it.
little by little, yeah, little by well, but she began with the give me the Sixers. Oh, can you go and buy some alcohol? Because we need this prepared. Can you put some water to boil?
Yeah, you became
And
her
suddenly I
assistant.
discovered myself an assistant. Yeah. But she was such a wise, interesting person that sometimes she says, hold the leg. And it is not usual that a man will be looking at a woman's body or helping, but this is something that I forgot to say, but I was already trained in bone healing since I was a kid by an auntie here in Mexico. It's a different history, but I already knew how to do messages and how to do bone healing. And she noticed that I was good at that, and she began to, can you message the stomach of the woman? And she saw that I could put the baby in position because I know how to do it. And little by little, she began. In that sense, we received dozens of babies, and the woman on town were beginning to get familiar with me, and they were beginning to develop trust in a man that suddenly could touch the breast to see if there are bowls or something that I can do therapy. But little by little, they got accustomed. And by the way, Maria, she was an authority in town. So if she says something, everybody were going to follow
Listen,
her orders.
There's something.
Yeah,
Let me
completely.
interrupt here. There is something about, even in my experience, with women that are eccentric, or eccentrically brilliant. There is something about men in their circles who just want to do things for them. It's like this sounds like one of these women. You just want to be in her presence and just do stuff for her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, and somehow is this history of my, or let's say her, or her training of me goes like in an archetypical way. Remember, there's the archetype of the old witch.
Yep.
From Piaget and all of them that developed the idea of the old witch, the archetype. It's not Piaget, sorry, but anyways, the archetypes ways, and but she was so strong, and she was so firm for everything, and she was so wise that there was a moment in which I was really fascinated by the way she was performing and doing stuff. But most important, or very important, was the way she was, in a sense, silent. She wasn't like an explanation giver as such, but only with her eyes she can control the situation. And then, for my surprise, for my amusement, for everything that I always wanted to know, I began to see that precisely conditions and factors during pregnancy will lead to different conditions, not only to the delivery point, but also to the way in which the babies begin to behave.
Mm.
For example, just to make one very simple example that I more or less mentioned, that the father is absent, the father does not want the baby, the father is against the pregnancy, the mother suffers, the mother struggles to have the baby. Those deliveries are more difficult, but later on you can see a more empathetic babies. And I was like, oh yeah, this kid is more eager to this, or this kid is more eager to this, or this couple of twins. We got twins one day, and I think they were the first in town ever. And I began to make connections. Then what I was saying, this my idea of knowing the secret knowledge or the esoterical or the enchanting or whatever, simply I was overwhelmed by the facts. Like I could understand human behavior based on the conditions of the baby, and by the way, I could track those conditions. You can see, mention whatever, and I can tell you what is the condition between the mother and the father. And she noticed that I was making notes and everything. She was first in her first, let's say, impressions about me. She was a little bit angry with me. She was like, "What do you need to write? Why don't you just memorize or something like that?" Later on, she was like, "Write." Right. The order. Well, take a note.
I have to tell you, I felt like I knew. I mean, I still feel like I know nothing, but I felt like I knew nothing when I started to have kids. Like the old me back then, like the pre-kid me, there is a wisdom that I gained almost instantly when I had my first child, and that wisdom said, "Buddy, let go of your ego, because now you're going to learn." And I can imagine now listening to you with your experience. I mean, you're in your 20s and early 30s learning this, and you're learning from a master in the mountains, and you are seeing the results of the practice in the town with these babies growing up into infants and little children and teenagers and adults. You are witnessing that before you even have yours. There is a lot of power, influence, and wisdom there, having been exposed to that sort of thing. And now, sorry, I'm just going to add this one thing. Your wife is now pregnant.
Yes, my wife is now pregnant, but there's and I'm the happiest man ever for a lifetime. desire to be fulfilled, that is already being fulfilled. Well, but there's a previous stuff. When I was on my 20s and met Paris, I was still some sort of troubled young adult looking
Mhm.
for knowledge and looking for, if you would want to call it enlightenment, well, it could be, but more for knowledge, answers. For me, one of the most important was to discover and to know which is the way, which is the system, or which is the process, or what is really to make a decision. Which part of you is the one, or which is the you making a decision, was something that was my fascination. Later on, I began to see the babies developing and the experience, the memory, their behavior, and by the way, I was always surrounded by kids. They were always my kids. I was always like a shepherd with all my kids because they knew me and they, and by the way, we chant to the babies during pregnancy. That is a way of the spiritual guide to make connection with babies. And they already knew me somehow. They always got good connection with me.
Yeah, sorry,
Well,
I'm going to
between that,
interrupt here with something else you said to me, Fabian. In ceremonial ways to develop a baby, and talking to a baby is the same way as talking to the trees and to the ocean.
oh yeah, yeah, in the Maya way, there's always the remark made by every spiritual guide that everything is alive, that you have to consider everything as a receptor of your consciousness, and that if you tune into that, I'm using the word tune just for a way to make it understandable. If you tune or if you connect, you can also listen to the pulses of the earth, of the breezes of the world, the early morning clouds. You can read and you can understand. And this is a culture, this is a civilization that highly is going to tell you pay attention to everything. Pay attention to the balance in nature. Pay attention to the clouds. Pay attention to the velocity of the wind, the speed of the wind. Pay attention to your own pulses regarding, for example, swimming in a river. Then this way of talking to the baby is not unusual because we consider everything to be alive. But to make a correct communication, we enter into a process of what a consultation can be seen also as a ceremony in which we talk to the babies. Then the baby is already familiarized, not with the content of my language, but with my presence and the move and the way I chant. And the way I chant is always different regarding the conditions of the pregnancy. If the mother is literally in pain or in apprehension, my mood and the way I chant is softer. Is if everything goes someplace, well, it's a more happy way of speaking to the baby. The baby make connections. The baby begins to move. The baby can follow even instructions. And by saying this, I have to once again go back to saying this is in every way of an understanding a science, not a believing. I can prove it. We can go on to that. That when the baby begins to be in connection with me, the chanter or the therapist, the baby can already begin to follow my ideas, my mood, my presence.
Yeah.
There are many ways of doing that, those procedures, but it's always a connection.
Your father was from Nicaragua and your mother is Mexican. And
Exactly.
your father was a guerrilla fighter.
Mm-hmm.
He was Mayan. His guerrilla. He was a mountain man as well. And
Yeah.
it's funny. What did you say? He was both a wise ass and a badass. He was a rural professor, so he knew a lot of languages, and that's why he was used a lot by the guerrillas to smuggle in bullets from and arms from Mexico to help fight. And then I asked you why. What were they fighting? And you gave me a little bit of an education. I looked it up, of course. You called it savage capitalism, where foreign landowners, excuse me, would purchase land because the land would be sold with people on it.
Oh, yeah.
So people were dispossessed of their lives to a corporation. and then later on, so you, sorry, I'm just filling in the blanks here for the listener, because you've already expressed a lot of the story to me. Is that you lived a troubled childhood because you weren't Mexican and you weren't necessarily Mayan, but you were not you were the others when you were living in Mexico. And then you said, when you were growing up in Mexico, then you said when you came to find your roots in Guatemala, sorry, Guatemala. At first, the first contact didn't go terribly well because they thought that maybe you were looking for land or money from family long lost, but they understood that you wanted to find more find out more about Mayan culture because that's what you felt. And so you said you lived a complete acceptance and that you were loved and that was good for your consciousness.
Well, yes. Well, that's an adventure of life. Because what we have heard, even also we have heard this in Canada recently, is that I lived on my own. What is precisely the pressure of the dominant, or let's say, what Western cultures sometimes do to members to other cultures? That is assimilation into culture. And when I was a kid without my biological father, I was more given and directed to understand the Western culture, to enter into, to go and proceed, not as a Mayan, not as a native, but as a member of the Western culture. My grandmother was spoiling me everything like that. And for example, I learned English first, that I learned Maya, or relearned Maya, Quiché. But anyways, there's something inside that I cannot define completely. Maybe this is what precisely my father gives me, or what was the composition of my own self regarding to him, or what his participation was, that was always pushing me back, or to do continuous efforts to understand cultures, Maya cultures, but mostly spirituality. And my ways of going back home, going back to relearn, to understand, to explore, was also a way of filling empty spaces in consciousness. And like when you don't know that you don't know something that you didn't, that you maybe you will, but maybe you can understand this area in which everything is like foggy a little bit, but you have some certainty that you do belong, that you do need, that you do want something, although it's blurred. And I knew it was over there. I wanted to go to know, to satisfy us, to say something that with few elements of comprehension, as some papers in the house, storage and hidden in a box in the house, I began to do my first travelings, trying to find what was that.
Yeah.
The most important part in that sense is a way of a reconciliation in me with my fatherly roots and with my own culture, that, by the way, was always stronger than being a member of the Western civilization. And now I am involved. I have no problem. There's no drama. I have no problems in navigating with both.
Well, your Guatemalan family and townspeople, your network there, I wrote this down as well. They said that your father was a smuggler of bullets. You're a smuggler of knowledge.
Well, what happens is that for them, it was a surprise that my father was so into the guerrilla fighting. Yes, what we call the civil war in Guatemala, or the area of violence, is mostly fighting against the landowners in the beginning, but later on, as all civil wars, is fighting mostly everybody against the other. This organization, the ORPA, that was close to my father's, or my town, was one of the most active in the southern part of Guatemala and close to Mexico. My father, who was a very knowledgeable man, rural professor, and trained also diplomatic, as to say something in diplomacy in between peoples, was sent as a mission to get bullets. He ended up in southern USA, in California, buying, because, well, Americans are very good to sell guns, and my father was the smuggler. My father was the one that knew all the ways to smuggle not only arms, but also not only bullets, but also arms.
Mm.
In hidden in trucks and stuff. He was, in that sense, he was developing skills to speak and to be portrayed as a Mexican man, crossing to the USA, crossing the border, acquiring these goods, these bullets. And my family was surprised when they saw me, and one of the assertions that they told me was, when after some conversations were, well, your father was a smuggler of bullets, but now it seems to be that now that you are a writer, you are a smuggler of knowledge. Then the family spirit is on. I was told, and I said, well, yes.
Father would be proud.
Yes. I'm very proud of that, because I can recognize that mood, that spirit, that was given by my father is very active on me. I love to smuggle ideas. This is an example, because this is a full science to be understood, and I'm smuggling the ideas from the mountains to be open to the world, and I'm very proud and happy about that. And now I'm going to connect the answer. Although I didn't want in the beginning to be a midwife, I later on understanding everything about what I wanted precisely in the way we are created, and the feminine position as the creator to be the most important. And suddenly, when I began to saw the little faces, one thing that really amazed me, if I began to cry, just give me time, but I began to see the little hands of the babies. I remember when I caught the first umbilical cords. I remember when I began to see their first expressions in the eyes, the hair, but I don't know why the little heart beginning to bump. I changed completely, and they were not my kids, and still I could see the love, I could see the connection, I could feel the let's say the atmosphere of love, and the love that my teacher teach me to be given to the kids. And as I told you later on, those were my kids. I was like a shepherd with a lot of kids always playing with me. And they call me tat, 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 that it means father. And I was always jumping in the trees and going to the rivers, and I almost raised up also some of my kids. But that was not my experience. Now that my wife is pregnant, I'm living the life in a very renewed way.
Are
I
they
don't
going
know
to call
what
you
my
Tat?
yes, and I don't know what my child is going to be, a smuggler of another stuff, but maybe we can continue the spirit of the family, which is
So,
strong, by the way.
I didn't know that Tat. I did, because I didn't bother to ask. I didn't know that Tat meant father. But does that mean actual biological father? Does it mean spiritual father? What does it mean?
Exactly, because in the Mayan culture, when you can be a biological dad, father, nan, mother. When you are a spiritual guide, you begin to be a father for the community, and or a mother for the community. And usually, this in the ceremonial ways of speaking, you can be both. You can be a chuch kahau, that it means you are the mother and the father of the town. You are the guide. You are the one that gives the clarity.
The
You are
most
the one that,
complete.
yeah. It is asked, as it is asked for you to be married, to being complementary with a person.
Amazing.
In a way to understand that we are not isolated. We can also be in composition with another person. What I lack maybe is, well, by the way, it's a fact. What I lack is mostly the gifts likes of my wife, and what my wife likes is what I can provide. We're very complementary in that way, and I'm so happy about that. Now, for example, I have been, this is like a little gossiping. This is peculiarly because in all the other cases, for example, when I was receiving kids, I hold sometimes the happiness, sometimes the mood, sometimes the sadness. But in this present time, I'm as hormonal as my wife. Sometimes I cannot wake up. Sometimes I only need hugs during the day. Sometimes I need to take a nap.
You're
Sometimes
following the pulse of her blood.
yeah. Yeah, and this is a constant contact. We live together and we work in the same house, in the same space, and it seems that that increases the sensations. We are dreaming mostly, let's say, the same. We're pulsating, as to say something, time at the same in the same way. And I'm the other day it was amazing. I was like, "How do you love me?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so hormonal in this moment," and I have never experienced that with all my kids. But now this is amazing. Then I didn't choose to be a spiritual guide, but when I saw the immensity of the knowledge pregnancy holds, I immediately begin to receive my babies. And my teacher was like, one day she left me alone in the house to receive the woman that I was already preparing. Now, to answer the other question that was left on the air, why I'm not offering openly? Yes, I can offer openly,
You have a
but
good memory. I asked that like half an hour ago.
yeah, well, what I can, I'm open to receive babies all the time. What I have to be more, let's say, what I have to deal with sometimes is with what the laws of particular or a particular country can be. For example, here in Mexico, is absurd, but you cannot receive babies if you are only a midwife. You have to do in clandestinity, but and it's a problem. In the mountains, there's no problem. In Guatemala, there's no problem. But in some places, there are restrictions. That's why I don't post on my web page that I do it. I can do it all the time, and there are so many techniques and there are so many ways. What I can offer, what I do offer openly is to be tracking and to prepare the woman for the last moment if any legal condition is not well received in any place. I can do it. I do love to sing to babies, to prepare babies, to get the connection with babies is what I really love to do the most. Receiving when you have a track when you're tracking the full pregnancy, there's no problem. I will say that 95 of my kids were born like this because we had the continuous consultation and therapy, no matter how many negative aspects. And at the end, we have that knowledge to make it possible. But that's the answer. I can receive, but don't say just because local rules.
That's clear. That's you've clarified it. Thank you. But two last questions, two quick questions.
Yeah.
I would be I would kick myself if I didn't ask you this because the last few podcasts or in amongst the last few podcasts there the year 2012 has come up as a key year for the person on the podcast, and I shared as well. For me, is 2012 something that is important, a year that was important in the Mayan calendar?
Not at all. It was only a cultural phenomenon.
Okay.
As I said, the old ways of the long count are very interesting, are beautiful. It's a device created by our ancestors, but it's no longer in use.
Right.
These books about the prophecies and stuff were completely false. Every one of them. No,
Mm-hmm.
we the spiritual guys, we sent a lot of videos, and I started a blog in those days to speak openly about how you shouldn't fear anything. You shouldn't fear anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of doomsday talk around 2012. Yeah. No, but I was referring to it as as a year of change, as a year of something particularly positive. No,
not really. But in a sense, it resulted as a change. beyond, let's say, what can be called the energetically or whatever spiritual ways. Anyways, though that December of 2012 was very interesting because by January of 2013, the world didn't end it, and now the Mayans were back in our real position. Like as
okay, last
we
question.
were no longer the stars.
You've cleared it up again. Last question for you before we go. What is greatness to you?
What is what?
Greatness.
Greatness, to be great. But do you refer to like that as a concept?
You interpret it the way you want to.
Greatness. Greatness as the way in which we direct the stuff is when you left nobody behind. Greatness is, for example, now that I'm a teacher, I will say that if I can accomplish that is to make my students better than I. Is something that I will, and yesterday I told them, I'm not teaching you to follow me as a dog follows the owner. I will want you to bite me. I will want you to doubt about what I said. I will want you to put everything that you know in the order and in the service of the other. And for me, greatness is precisely that you left nobody behind. And in this case, as speaking of what we humans can accomplish, is precisely because people abuse the opposite. When someone arrives to a position of power, the first things they began to do is to abuse the other. I consider greatness, if we are talking about great or being or beyond or surpassing or acquiring something, is precisely not to left another or the other behind you. We don't own this world. We don't own this universe. We don't even own our life. Then why we have to be so pretentious? We can entangle us to create this. Can be even something as an idealization of life and society, but why not? We can build and create a better world.
Not at all surprised by your answer, considering what we've just discussed. And your story of awakening and helping others. Apab'yan, thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much to you and to all the listeners for opening their hearts for this conversation and to open this heart for this civilization beyond the 2012.
Those are good closing words. Thank you.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today? Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and share with your friends. And consider donating to help us produce more great conversations at behindgreatness.org/donate. Until next time.